Tonight, you find yourself arriving on the Eastern Front for the very first time. Not with a dramatic charge across a battlefield, not with the triumphant music of a war film, and certainly not with any clear understanding of what awaits you. Instead, your journey begins much more quietly. You are sitting in a crowded railway carriage somewhere far from home. The train rattles endlessly across hundreds of miles of track. The wooden bench beneath you has become increasingly uncomfortable over the past several days, and every position seems somehow worse than the last. Around you are dozens of other soldiers. Most are just as inexperienced as you are. Some stare silently through dusty windows. Others attempt conversation, though the topics rarely change. Home, food, weather, rumors, especially rumors. According to one man, the war will be over within months. According to another, nobody survives their first winter. A third soldier claims he knows someone who met a veteran who survived 3 entire years at the front. Nobody can verify any of these stories. That never stops anyone from repeating them. Outside, the landscape changes gradually. The towns become smaller. The roads become rougher. Railway stations appear increasingly temporary. Military traffic becomes more common. Freight cars loaded with supplies wait on sidings. Trucks gather near depots. Columns of troops move along distant roads. Every mile seems to carry you farther away from ordinary life. For many soldiers, this train journey would be their final opportunity to experience anything resembling comfort for quite some time. Not that the train itself is comfortable. The air inside smells faintly of coal smoke, damp uniforms, leather equipment, and too many people occupying too little space. At night, sleeping is difficult. Some men manage it anyway. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to sleep almost anywhere when sufficiently exhausted. Others spend hours staring into darkness while wheels clatter beneath them. Occasionally, the train stops unexpectedly. Nobody knows why. Perhaps another military train has priority. Perhaps damaged tracks require repairs. Perhaps someone far above your pay grade has made a decision involving maps and paperwork. You learn quickly that military life contains many situations where explanations simply never arrive. The train moves when it moves. The train stops when it stops. And your opinions regarding either matter are unlikely to change anything. Eventually, after days of travel, the atmosphere begins to shift. Veterans can often sense it before anyone else. The front is getting closer. The evidence appears gradually. Military police become more visible. Roads contain greater numbers of supply wagons and trucks. Occasionally, distant sounds drift across the countryside. Most are harmless, some are not. Nobody explains which is which. You are expected to learn. When the train finally reaches your destination, nobody announces it with great ceremony. A sergeant simply orders everyone to gather their equipment. The unloading process begins immediately. Suddenly there is movement everywhere, men lifting packs, officers shouting instructions, supply personnel directing traffic, railway workers moving cargo. You shoulder your equipment and step onto unfamiliar ground. This is not yet the front line. It is merely close enough. For now. The first thing many soldiers notice is the sheer amount of activity. The front depends upon endless logistics. Food must arrive, ammunition must arrive, fuel must arrive, medical supplies must arrive. Replacement soldiers, people like you, must also arrive. Behind every soldier near the fighting exists an enormous network of people working continuously to keep everything functioning. Most of them rarely appear in history books, yet without them, armies would stop moving within days. You spend your first hours waiting. Military service involves a surprising amount of waiting. Waiting for orders, waiting for transportation, waiting for paperwork, waiting for someone else to decide where you belong. Eventually, your unit receives instructions. You begin moving again. Not by train this time. On foot. The march feels longer than expected. Everything in military life seems longer than expected. The pack feels heavier. The road feels rougher. The distance feels greater. You pass villages that bear visible signs of war. Some buildings stand empty. Others show damage. Fields stretch across the landscape, interrupted by forests and rivers. The countryside appears peaceful enough from a distance, yet everyone knows peace here can be temporary. As evening approaches, you arrive at a rear area camp. This will serve as a temporary stop before reaching frontline positions. Compared with what lies ahead, it is relatively comfortable. Compared with home, it is not comfortable at all. You receive a place to sleep. Calling it a bed would require considerable imagination. Most soldiers quickly learn that military definitions of comfort differ dramatically from civilian ones. A dry place to lie down counts as luxury. A roof overhead counts as fortune. A hot meal counts as celebration. Your first meal near the front is memorable mostly because it is warm. Military food during wartime rarely wins culinary awards. It is designed to provide calories rather than excitement. Soup appears frequently. Bread appears frequently. Potatoes appear frequently. Variety appears less frequently. Still, after a long journey, even simple food feels welcome. Around you, conversations continue. Veterans occasionally join them. These experienced soldiers attract attention immediately. Everyone wants information. What is the front really like? How dangerous is it? How do you survive? Veterans rarely provide dramatic answers. Instead, they discuss practical matters. Keep your feet dry whenever possible. Never ignore a chance to rest. Protect your equipment. Eat when food is available. Write letters whenever you can. The advice sounds almost disappointingly ordinary. Yet ordinary habits often determine survival. The next morning begins early. Very early. Military organizations throughout history have displayed remarkable enthusiasm for waking people before sunrise. You gather equipment, receive additional instructions, and continue moving toward the front. The landscape grows quieter, not peaceful, just different. Birdsong mixes occasionally with distant mechanical sounds. Road traffic becomes increasingly military. Camouflaged vehicles appear, field positions become visible, communication lines stretch across roads and fields. Everything seems organized around a single purpose, supporting the men nearest the fighting. Eventually, you encounter your first frontline veterans. They look surprisingly ordinary. History books often portray soldiers as larger-than-life figures. Reality is usually less dramatic. These men appear tired, weathered, practical. Their uniforms show signs of prolonged use. Their equipment carries small modifications accumulated through experience. Every adjustment tells a story. An extra strap, a repaired pouch, a carefully chosen place to store personal items. Tiny adaptations developed over months of trial and error. You begin learning from observation. Nobody announces formal lessons. You simply watch and imitate. This process has educated soldiers for thousands of years. The veteran who survives long enough becomes an unofficial instructor. The newcomer pays attention. At least the wise newcomer does. Your first glimpse of actual frontline positions arrives almost unexpectedly. You have imagined them for days, perhaps weeks. Yet when they finally appear, they seem strangely ordinary. Trenches, dugouts, defensive positions, communication trenches connecting various sections. Not glorious, not cinematic, just practical. Designed by people whose primary concern is staying alive. The ground itself tells a story. Every sandbag, every timber support, every drainage ditch exists because someone learned a lesson. Usually the hard way. You receive your assigned position, not permanently. Nothing at the front feels permanent, but it is yours for now. The veterans explain local routines, where food arrives, where water can be found, where equipment is stored, which areas remain relatively safe, which areas deserve extra caution. The information arrives steadily. Names, locations, procedures, rules. So many rules, some official, many unofficial. The unofficial rules often matter more. As daylight fades, another realization begins to settle over you. The front is not constant action, it is routine, endless routine. Guard duty, maintenance, cleaning equipment, carrying supplies, repairing positions, observing surroundings, waiting, always waiting. The waiting surprises many newcomers. War films rarely dedicate significant time to waiting. Real soldiers often spend enormous portions of their lives doing exactly that. Hours pass. Nothing happens. Then something happens briefly. Then more waiting follows. Your first evening near the front arrives quietly. The sky darkens. Temperatures fall. Small lights remain carefully controlled. Voices stay relatively low. Everyone seems to understand unspoken rules. Conserve energy. Avoid unnecessary attention. Prepare for tomorrow. You sit with other soldiers. Some clean equipment, some write letters, others simply stare into darkness, thinking, remembering, wondering. Home feels very far away tonight, farther than any map could accurately describe. Yet life continues. Meals continue. Duties continue. Conversations continue. The ordinary routines of human existence somehow persist even here. Perhaps that is what surprises newcomers most. Not the danger, not the hardship, but the persistence of normal life amid extraordinary circumstances. Tomorrow you will begin learning those routines for yourself. Tomorrow you will discover that survival on the Eastern Front often depended less upon dramatic heroics and more upon mastering countless small habits. And as darkness settles over the position and tired soldiers prepare for another uncertain day, one question quietly remains. Of all the lessons veterans have learned through experience, which ones will prove most important during your first full week at the front? Boring history for sleep. What frontline soldiers faced during their first week on the Eastern Front. Part 2. Settling into frontline reality. By the time your first full morning at the front arrives, you are already beginning to understand something that no recruitment poster, newspaper article, or distant speech could fully explain. Life on the Eastern Front is not defined by a single dramatic moment. It is defined by routine. You wake before sunrise, not because you want to, not because you are particularly energetic, but because everyone else is already awake. The dugout around you slowly comes alive with movement. Boots scrape against packed earth. Equipment rattles softly. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a complaint about the weather. This, you quickly discover, is one of the most reliable traditions in military history. No matter the century, nation, or army, soldiers have always found something to complain about. If the weather is cold, they wish it were warm. If it is warm, they wish it were cool. If it rains, they dislike the mud. If it remains dry, they worry about dust. The complaints rarely solve anything, yet they somehow improve morale. A small fire burns nearby. A pot of coffee substitute or weak tea waits above it. The smell drifts through the morning air. Nobody would mistake it for a luxury cafe. Still, it provides warmth, and warmth matters, especially here. One veteran jokes that half the war is spent searching for heat. The other half is spent searching for dry socks. After several days, you begin to suspect he may be correct. Breakfast arrives. The meal is simple: bread, perhaps some porridge, perhaps soup left over from the previous evening. The exact menu varies depending upon supplies and circumstances. What remains constant is the attitude toward food. When food appears, you eat, not later, not after finishing another task. Now. Veterans emphasize this lesson repeatedly. Nobody knows when the next opportunity will arrive. You notice that experienced soldiers rarely waste anything. Every crumb of bread matters, every spoonful counts. It is not greed, it is practicality. The Eastern Front stretches across vast distances. Delivering supplies remains a constant challenge. Railways become damaged, roads become muddy, vehicles break down, weather interferes. Some days, everything arrives exactly as planned. Other days, the system struggles. The veteran who finishes his meal today never needs to worry about whether he should have eaten it tomorrow. Soon after breakfast, work begins. Not combat, work. This surprises many newcomers. History often focuses upon battles, yet armies spend far more time preparing for battles than actually fighting them. A trench wall requires reinforcement. Sandbags need replacing. Drainage ditches need clearing. Equipment needs cleaning. Communication lines require inspection. There is always something requiring attention. You spend part of the morning carrying supplies. The task sounds simple. It is not. Boxes of ammunition are heavier than they appear. Crates of food seem to gain weight with every kilometer. Water containers quickly become everyone's least favorite responsibility. Yet all these items must reach their destination. Without them, nothing functions. The veterans move steadily, not quickly, not slowly. They have learned the value of conserving energy. A newcomer often tries to prove himself by working at maximum speed. The veterans rarely do. Experience teaches patience. The front rewards endurance more often than enthusiasm. As the hours pass, another reality becomes apparent. Mud. Mud exists everywhere. Roads become mud. Paths become mud. Fields become mud. Boots become mud. Everything eventually acquires some relationship with mud. Entire memoirs have been written about the subject, for good reason. Mud influences movement. Mud influences transportation. Mud influences morale. Mud even influences sleep. You begin understanding why soldiers discuss weather so frequently. Weather is not merely conversation. Weather determines daily life. A sudden rainstorm can transform ordinary tasks into exhausting challenges. A freezing night can change priorities completely. A warm day may briefly improve conditions. The environment constantly participates in every decision. By midday, you are becoming familiar with your immediate surroundings. The trench network no longer feels entirely confusing. You recognize landmarks. A supply position here, a communication trench there, a dugout entrance partially hidden beneath camouflage. The front slowly transforms from an abstract concept into a real place. Places possess personalities. So do military positions. Some sectors develop reputations. Quiet sectors, busy sectors, uncomfortable sectors, sectors famous for excellent cooks, sectors famous for terrible cooks. You quickly learn that soldiers create humor wherever possible. Without humor, the routine would become unbearable. One veteran introduces you to a local tradition. Whenever a new soldier arrives, someone invents an absurd story about a nearby location. A forest haunted by invisible cows, a trench inhabited by particularly ambitious rabbits, a supply officer capable of smelling hidden chocolate from remarkable distances. The stories grow more ridiculous with each retelling. Everyone understands they are nonsense. That is part of the appeal. The afternoon passes quietly. You perform guard duty for the first time. At first, the task seems straightforward. Observe, remain alert, report anything unusual. Simple. Then the hours begin passing. Slowly, very slowly. You stare across fields and distant tree lines. Nothing moves. Then a bird appears. You watch it for several minutes. Then nothing moves again. Guard duty introduces soldiers to a peculiar relationship with time. Minutes feel longer. Hours stretch unexpectedly. The human mind begins noticing details previously ignored. Cloud formations, wind direction, shadows, the sound of distant vehicles, the movement of grass. Veterans often develop remarkable observational skills simply because they spend so much time looking at the same landscape. As evening approaches, mail arrives. The effect is immediate. Soldiers who appeared tired suddenly become attentive. Conversations pause. Names are called. Letters change everything. For a few moments, the war feels distant. Home feels closer. A letter might contain news about family, local events, harvests, birthdays, neighbors, ordinary life continuing somewhere beyond the front. Many soldiers read letters repeatedly, not because they forget the contents, because reading provides comfort, a connection to another world. You receive a letter yourself. The handwriting is familiar. The words are ordinary. Yet somehow they feel more valuable than almost anything else you own. The veterans understand. Nobody mocks a soldier reading the same letter several times. Most have done exactly the same thing. After sunset, life changes again. Night introduces its own routines. Noise discipline becomes important. Movement becomes more cautious. Visibility decreases. Simple tasks require greater attention. Some soldiers sleep, others work. Someone is always awake. Someone is always watching. The front never truly rests. You are assigned a night duty. Not exciting, not dramatic, simply necessary. The darkness feels different here. In civilian life, darkness often signals relaxation. Here, it demands awareness. Every unfamiliar sound attracts attention. Most sounds prove harmless. Animals, wind, natural noises. Yet experience teaches caution. The veterans seem remarkably calm. At first, this appears mysterious. Then you realize the explanation. They have heard these sounds before, hundreds of times, perhaps thousands. Familiarity reduces anxiety. Not completely, but enough. When your shift finally ends, exhaustion arrives immediately. You return to the dugout. The space feels smaller than before, yet somehow more familiar. A strange transformation has begun. The place is becoming temporary home, not because you love it, not because it is comfortable, simply because humans adapt. Adaptation may be humanity's greatest survival skill. Give people sufficient time, and they will create routines almost anywhere. Over the following days, this process continues. You learn where to place equipment. You learn which veterans provide useful advice. You learn how to avoid unnecessary work without attracting attention. An ancient military tradition practiced across countless generations. You discover small comforts, a relatively dry corner, a favorite mug, a friend who tells amusing stories, a cook who occasionally obtains extra potatoes. Tiny victories become surprisingly important. The front teaches appreciation for small things, a dry blanket, a warm drink, a successful letter delivery, good weather, an uninterrupted night's sleep. None are guaranteed. Therefore, all are valued. By the fifth day, you begin noticing changes within yourself. The routines that once seemed strange now feel normal. You wake automatically. You understand schedules. You recognize faces. You move through trenches without becoming lost. The transformation is subtle, yet significant. You are no longer entirely new. Not experienced, not yet, but no longer completely unfamiliar with life here. The veterans notice as well. Their conversations include you more frequently. Advice becomes less formal. Occasionally, they even trust you with minor responsibilities. This, more than any speech or ceremony, signals acceptance. You are becoming part of the unit, and units matter. The Eastern Front is enormous. Distances are vast. Conditions are difficult. Individual soldiers rely heavily upon the people around them. Shared work creates trust. Shared hardships create bonds. A man who helps repair a trench wall during rain becomes memorable. A man who shares food becomes memorable. A man who can reliably make coffee somehow becomes extremely memorable. Military friendships often grow from practical foundations. Dependability matters. As your first week approaches its end, another realization emerges. The front is not what you expected. It is simultaneously more ordinary and more demanding. There are moments of tension, moments of uncertainty, yet much of daily life revolves around surprisingly mundane concerns: food, sleep, weather, work, letters, routine. The extraordinary circumstances of war somehow coexist with ordinary human needs, and perhaps that is the strangest lesson of all. Even here, on one of history's largest battlefronts, people remain people. They seek warmth, they seek friendship, they seek comfort, they seek normality wherever it can be found. Yet despite these routines, despite the growing familiarity, despite the small comforts you have discovered, one question remains unanswered. What happens when the first week finally ends and the reality of long-term frontline life truly begins to settle in? Boring history for sleep. What frontline soldiers faced during their first week on the Eastern Front. Part 3. The end of the first week. By the time the seventh day arrives, something curious has happened. The front no longer feels entirely unfamiliar. That may sound strange. After all, 1 week is not a long time. A week passes quickly in ordinary life. 7 mornings, 7 evenings, a handful of meals, a few conversations. Yet on the Eastern Front, a week could feel much longer. Not because the calendar changed, but because every day demanded adaptation. During your first day, nearly everything seemed new. Every sound attracted attention. Every instruction required concentration. Every unfamiliar face needed remembering. Now, by the end of the week, many of those things have become routine. You know where your equipment belongs. You know which path turns muddy after rain. You know which veteran tells the best stories. You know who wakes up cheerful and who wakes up complaining. You know which section of trench collects water first during a storm. These details might seem unimportant, yet they form the foundation of survival. History often celebrates great victories, famous commanders, and dramatic turning points. Ordinary soldiers rarely experienced history that way. For them, survival frequently depended upon remembering dozens of small details: the location of supplies, the timing of meals, the habits of fellow soldiers, the condition of equipment, the safest route between positions. These practical matters occupied much of daily life. The romantic image of war gradually disappears. Reality replaces it. Reality is usually less dramatic and considerably more tiring. The weather continues to influence everything. By now, you understand why older veterans discuss it constantly. A cold morning changes routines, rain changes routines, wind changes routines, snow changes routines. The Eastern Front covered enormous distances, stretching through landscapes that could become remarkably challenging. Soldiers learned quickly that nature itself often became a participant in daily life. A muddy road could delay supplies. A freezing night could create new problems. A storm could transform ordinary tasks into major efforts. You spend part of the seventh day helping move provisions from a rear supply point. The work is repetitive. Lift, carry, walk, return, repeat, hour after hour. Nobody writes famous songs about carrying crates. No monuments celebrate the movement of potatoes, yet armies depend upon such tasks. Every meal begins with someone carrying supplies. Every functioning position depends upon countless ordinary jobs. The veterans rarely complain about this reality. They accepted it long ago. An army survives through logistics, and logistics are rarely glamorous. At midday, you find yourself sitting beside a veteran who has been at the front for considerably longer than you. He is repairing a piece of equipment. The task appears almost automatic. His hands move without hesitation. Years of repetition have created efficiency. He notices your curiosity. Without looking up, he offers a simple observation. The first week is always the strangest. Then he returns to his work. At first, the statement seems obvious. Later, you realize he meant something deeper. The first week represents a transition, the journey from expectation to reality. Before arrival, everything exists in imagination. After arrival, everything becomes concrete. The front gains texture, routine, structure. The unknown becomes known, at least partially. No veteran truly masters every aspect of life here. Conditions change constantly, new challenges emerge, unexpected situations appear. Yet experience provides confidence, and confidence matters. Not arrogance, not recklessness, simply the quiet confidence that comes from understanding your surroundings. As afternoon arrives, letters are distributed once again. Mail remains one of the most anticipated events of the week. Some soldiers receive several letters, others receive none. The emotional effect varies. A letter can improve an entire day, sometimes an entire week. The contents are often remarkably ordinary. Family news, weather reports, local gossip, descriptions of everyday life. Yet those ordinary details carry tremendous value. They remind soldiers that another world continues beyond the front. A world of farms, workshops, schools, markets, and homes. A world where daily concerns involve harvests rather than trench repairs. For a few moments, distance seems smaller. The gap between front and home narrows, not physically, but emotionally. One veteran keeps every letter he receives, carefully folded, carefully protected. The collection has grown substantial. Another soldier rereads the same letter so often that portions are nearly memorized. Nobody finds this unusual. Most understand completely. Humans carry pieces of home in whatever form they can. Letters happen to travel well. As evening approaches, your duties continue. Routine remains king. Weapons require maintenance. Positions require inspection. Equipment requires cleaning. The tasks never truly end. At first, this seemed exhausting. Now you begin understanding the purpose. Routine creates order. Order creates stability. Stability helps people function in difficult environments. Throughout history, soldiers have relied upon routines not simply because commanders demanded them, but because routines reduce uncertainty. When tomorrow resembles yesterday, life becomes more manageable, even in challenging circumstances, especially in challenging circumstances. The sun begins lowering toward the horizon. Shadows stretch across the landscape. The familiar evening transformation begins. Activity changes rhythm. Conversations become quieter. Movement becomes more deliberate. Night preparations begin. You notice that your own actions have become more efficient. A week ago, every task required conscious effort. Now many happen automatically. You know where items belong. You know what needs doing. Adaptation continues. This realization arrives gradually. No single moment announces it. Nobody awards a certificate. Nobody delivers a speech. Yet you understand it nonetheless. You are becoming accustomed to frontline life, not comfortable. Few people ever become truly comfortable, but accustomed. And there is an important difference. The veteran who spoke earlier notices something. You no longer look around constantly. You no longer react to every unfamiliar sound. You no longer ask where everything is located. Small changes, yet meaningful ones. He nods approvingly. It is not a dramatic gesture. Veterans rarely waste energy on dramatic gestures. Still, the meaning is clear. You have survived the first week. A surprisingly important milestone. Not because 7 days possess magical significance, but because the first week contains the steepest learning curve. Everything is new. Everything requires adjustment. Everything demands attention. After that initial period, the process becomes somewhat easier. Not easy, simply easier. The evening meal arrives. The food remains simple. Nobody expects otherwise. Yet meals possess importance beyond nutrition. They provide structure, predictability, community. Soldiers gather together. Stories are exchanged. Rumors continue circulating. Military organizations throughout history have displayed an almost limitless capacity for generating rumors. Some concern supplies, some concern weather, some concern future plans. Most prove inaccurate. This rarely prevents their spread. One soldier confidently predicts a major change next week. Another predicts exactly the opposite. Both seem equally certain. The veterans smile. They have witnessed this process many times before. Predictions come and go. Reality follows its own schedule. Darkness settles fully. The sky above appears clear tonight. Stars emerge gradually. For a brief moment, the war seems distant. The landscape grows quiet. Not silent, never completely silent, but quieter. You find yourself reflecting upon the week. The train journey feels strangely far away now. So does the uncertainty of arrival, the confusion, the unfamiliar faces, the endless questions. Much has changed in only 7 days. You have learned how the position functions. You have learned who to trust. You have learned where supplies come from. You have learned how weather influences daily life. You have learned the value of dry socks, perhaps one of history's most underrated survival lessons. Most importantly, you have learned that life at the front revolves around adaptation, not dramatic heroics, not constant excitement. Adaptation. The ability to accept circumstances and continue functioning. The ability to find routine amid uncertainty. The ability to appreciate small comforts. Throughout history, countless ordinary people have demonstrated this skill. Farmers adapting to poor harvests, sailors adapting to storms, explorers adapting to unfamiliar landscapes, and soldiers adapting to life on distant fronts. Human resilience often appears in quiet forms, not grand speeches, not spectacular achievements, simply the decision to continue, to wake up, to perform necessary tasks, to help those around you, to move forward one day at a time. The Eastern Front demanded that quality from millions of people. Many came from villages. Many came from cities. Many had never traveled far from home before the war. Yet they adapted, because adaptation was necessary. As the night deepens, the position settles into familiar rhythms. Some soldiers sleep, some remain on watch, some write letters beneath carefully controlled light. Others sit quietly with their thoughts. Tomorrow will resemble today in many ways. There will be work, there will be meals, there will be weather, there will be routines. Life will continue, and perhaps that is the most important lesson of the first week. When people imagine history's great conflicts, they often picture extraordinary moments. Yet most historical experience consists of ordinary moments, small tasks, small decisions, small acts of endurance repeated day after day. Those quiet moments rarely appear in textbooks, yet they shaped lives just as surely as major events. By the end of your first week on the Eastern Front, you have not become a hero. You have not transformed into a legend. You have simply become something more realistic. A soldier learning how to live within extraordinary circumstances. A person discovering that survival often depends upon patience more than bravery, routine more than excitement, adaptation more than ambition. And as the stars continue shining above the vast Eastern Front and the familiar sounds of the night drift across the trenches, you settle into the rhythm that countless soldiers before you learned as well. One day, then another, then another. Not through grand gestures, but through steady persistence, the quiet, often overlooked skill that has carried ordinary people through history for thousands of years. And with that thought, your first week finally comes to an end.